So now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Russ Roca. Russ is the co-owner of the Pedaled-Russ Pedaled, and it's a bike travel blog that's actually been turned into a business. Since 2009, the Pedaled-Russ Pedaled has focused on the ways in which cycling can positively impact small and rural communities, and has partnered with community leaders and tourism agencies across the U.S. to work with the challenges of marketing a destination to a bicycling audience. So please welcome Russ Roca.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. And I'm super excited to be here in Idaho. I have to confess, this is only my second time in Boise, although I've done a little work around the state. And I got a chance to meet some of you last night. And when I said the word bike tourism, a lot of people gave me this kind of look. So hopefully I'll be able to flesh it out a little bit more and can all speak the same language. So speaking of which, who here is familiar with the concept of bike tourism or works in that field? Okay, a handful of you. Who here is like, why tourism at a walk bike conference? Okay, perfect. Well, hopefully I'll be able to show you guys how it's relevant to the work that you guys do. And full warning, I'm a Mac guy, and this is a PC world, so there's going to be some bumps, but we're going to travel on through. And one of the unique things about my presentation is that I show a lot of video. I've actually been documenting lots of case studies of positive economic development in rural communities. So instead of me just telling you about how awesome bike tourism is, I like to bring these people from these communities into the room with me. So there's going to be some jumping back and forth between my presentation and the YouTube, so thanks for bearing with me. And speaking of which, I'm going to kick off with this video that kind of gives you a big picture idea.
How bicycles can save small-town America. In 2009, we sold everything we owned to travel by bicycle. We pedaled 10,000 miles over 15 months in a long and meandering route around the U.S. During our travels, we stopped in hundreds of small towns along the way, eating in diners, shopping in local markets, camping, and staying in the occasional motel. As we traveled, an idea dawned on us. Something so simple that it just made sense. We often think of bicycles as great in cities, but bicycles can save small towns. Let's take the time-honored tradition of the Great American Road Trip. Imagine a journey of 200 miles. If you're driving, you'll easily complete that distance in a single day. You'll probably fill up on gas in the morning, grab some lunch in the afternoon, and spend the night at your final destination. Unless you get off the freeway, you probably won't even notice all the small towns you passed along the way. Now let's look at that same trip on a bicycle. A person on bike is moving slower and needs to stop more often. Instead of just one overnight stay, the cyclist needs 4. And instead of just one meal, the cyclist is eating at least 12. Because bicyclists seek out quieter roads, they will also stop through more small towns. Over the course of the same journey, the bicyclist has a greater potential for positive economic impact on the area. It sounds like a great theory, but can it actually happen? Yes. In 2011, we traveled to New Zealand and documented the success of the Otago Central Rail Trail. The 100-mile gravel bike path completely revitalized an area that was once dying on its feet. In Montana, a small community built Bike Camp to attract traveling cyclists and help local businesses. And in Oregon, newly designated scenic bikeways are bringing cyclists to rural areas of the state, not only to enjoy the amazing riding, but to help those small economies. We often hear about how great cycling is for big urban centers, but it can also do a lot of good in rural regions. Bicycle tourism is a perfect fit with small towns. What other activity requires only quiet roads and a warm meal at the end of the day? To learn more about bicycle travel and how bicycle tourism can help rural regions, visit our website.
So a quick note about all these videos are all online, and I think, Cynthia, you're going to have my presentation. So we started making these videos about a decade ago just because people weren't talking about bike tourism, and we wanted to give people resources to share with their elected officials, with their chambers. So definitely feel free later if you need any of these videos to continue passing them on. So when I was talking to a bunch of people and trying to explain what I do, the best I could come up with is it's complicated. So I'm going to go a little bit, give you guys a little bit of a backstory about how this whole thing started. So like I alluded to, back in 2009, we sold everything, and every big adventure starts with a yard sale, and a big yard sale. And we traveled for 3 years, mostly around the US, and a stint in New Zealand. We were all set to go abroad from New Zealand, but we're really tired after living 3 years on the bicycle. And we saw many beautiful places in the US and in New Zealand, lots of cows. But the thing that sticks with you when you do long-term travel like this is actually all the human interactions. And we had so many amazing interactions with people in the tiniest of towns. I mean, we're talking towns of like 50. Laura kept a little logbook of all the people we stayed with, and I think at the end of that journey, we stayed with over 140 people, from all walks of life, most of them complete strangers. And it was just such a fascinating and heartening experience. There was one experience that we had that really kind of shaped our work from just being this kind of fun travel into turning it into a form of advocacy, and that was when we were in Twin Bridges, Montana. So I don't know if any of you guys, has anyone here been to Twin Bridges? Awesome fishing destinations where they make Winston rods, but kind of not a whole lot else going on there. I remember chatting with one local, and he described Twin as a beautiful place to starve. But it did have a couple of assets. Since the 1970s, there have been touring cyclists passing through on the adventure cycling Trans Am route. And one local, he's pictured here, this is Bill White. He saw them, and he's like, why are they just passing through Twin? Why are they staying in the next town? Let's give them a reason to stop in Twin. And he described it as like watching gold flow down a river, and all they had to do is reach out their hand and grab it. So with a lot of his own money and with some money from the community, they built Bike Camp, which is pretty humble in terms of accommodations. It's essentially a big gazebo with a cooler, and there's some local business information in there. But since then, it's become a bit of a destination for traveling cyclists. I remember when we were pedaling through there, days in advance, people were telling us, oh, you have to stop in Twin Bridges. You have to stop in Twin Bridges. They have this awesome place called Bike Camp. And that's a lot of hype for what's essentially a large shed, But the amazing thing is, like, they have a guest book, and when you flip open this guest book, there are people from New York, from all different parts of the country, people from the Netherlands, people from Japan, people from South Africa that all stopped in Twin Bridges. For such a small investment, it had put Twin Bridges on the map to hundreds, if not thousands, of cyclists. So literally after we met Bill, we got a tour. I actually have an interview of Bill White on our YouTube channel. He's since passed away. This is what I scribbled in the tent, right behind Bike Camp. And eventually when we stopped traveling, I was like, oh, this has got to be turned into an animation. And that's what you guys watched in the beginning. So since then, after we sailed from our travels, we landed in Portland, Oregon, and it was a right place, right time. The state of Oregon was launching a big push to promote bicycling as a tourism attraction in the state. And we were fortunate enough to work with Travel Oregon around their Scenic Bikeway program. And I don't know if you guys know much about Travel Oregon, but they're pretty well respected in the tourism world. It's kind of like going to play a pickup game of basketball and your teammate's Michael Jordan. Right? They're just super innovative. They push the envelope. And our definition of bike tourism really expanded from the kind that we were doing, which was self-supported bike touring, to a much larger tent. So we helped them create some content for their bicycle tourism studios, did a lot of marketing around the Scenic Bikeway program, which I'll jump into a little bit later on. And we've also worked with other states. This is, we did a couple pieces for Travel Iowa, promoting their gravel road riding. How many people here are familiar with gravel riding? Some. Okay, actually a fair number. It's huge. It's literally the fastest growing kind of type of bike that's being sold. It's rapidly becoming the most popular type of cycling event. We've seen all sorts of new businesses, new destinations pop up around gravel roads. And I think Idaho has a few gravel roads, right? So I want you guys to start looking at your gravel roads as latent bicycle assets now, because I mean, you guys are just rich with them. We did actually do some work with Visit Idaho. This was about 2 years ago. They sent us around a couple parts of the state to kind of tease out interesting bicycling stories. And we wrote some pieces for them. When we started working with them, I was hoping it was going to be the start of something larger, that would get them really stoked on bicycling. But unfortunately, it hasn't continued on since that initial interaction. But that's where I need your guys' help. At the end of this presentation, I want all of you to email Visit Idaho and tell them that you heard an awesome presentation on bike tourism and they should do more. So this was a piece that we did. Typically, when we talk about bicycle tourism, yes, we love cycling, but we also like to do other things when we travel, right? So the more things that you can pack into an experience, the more likely a person's going to make that journey and the longer they're going to stay. So a lot of our pieces were focused around bicycling, fly fishing, and trail running, and how you can incorporate that into a vacation. So this is a piece about the Trail to Quarter Lanes, but also the larger Bitterroot 300 route in the area. Okay, so what is bicycle tourism? I mentioned that it's a big tent. Here's another good explainer video that we created.
What is bicycle tourism? Bicycling has never been more popular in the United States. This renewed interest in bikes has led to the growth of bicycle tourism, in which people are incorporating bicycles into their vacations. Simply put, bicycle tourism is any travel-related activity for the purpose of pleasure which incorporates a bicycle. Bicycle tourism includes large supported multi-day event rides like RAGBRAI and Cycle Oregon, which bring thousands of cyclists to rural communities. Bicycle tourism includes destination-based bicycling, in which mountain bikers and road cyclists overnight in a location and go on day rides. Bicycle tourism includes self-supported bicycle travel, like the Oregon Scenic Bikeways and adventure cycling routes, that people ride across the state and even across the country. Bicycle tourism includes bicycling events, like criteriums, cyclocross races, and gravel grinders, that not only bring in competitors, but also their friends and family. And bicycle tourism includes casual cyclists who might rent a bike while on vacation or go on a bicycle tour around town. Bicycle tourism is a growing and exciting trend in the adventure travel market, and it's a great way to bring economic development to an area. Contact us to learn more about how to be a successful bicycle tourism destination.
So as you can see, bike tourism is a big tent. So depending on what your region has to offer, there's definitely some way to apply it. It could be a rail trail, it could be, like I said, gravel roads, road riding, or event rides. But I know what you're wondering, show me the money. So this is a big number part of the presentation. In Oregon, in 2012, they released a really unique study. It was the first kind of bicycle tourism specific spending study, and what they found is that outside visitors that came to the state of Oregon to ride bikes spent $400 million in 2012. And everyone says that's a fairly conservative estimate. $175 million of that was on accommodations, and the spending is 20% more than the typical visitor. That's beer money. Montana recently did its own study looking at self-supported cyclists, so people that are carrying all their stuff and camping, and what they found that the cyclists were spending $75 a day, but with an average length visit of 8 days. So depending on what kind of bicycle tourism activity is going on, the spending patterns are going to change. So if someone's doing a short weekend experience, they're going to spend more because it's less time, but the longer the trip is, they're going to spend less because they have to economize time versus money. So depending on what kind of experience you guys are offering, it's going to adjust the spending a bit. This one's fairly new. This just came out this May. Bicycling in Northwest Arkansas provides $137 million just to that little corner of Arkansas. And what's interesting about this study is that it was funded by the Walton Foundation. They've really taken the town of Bentonville and are trying to make it into a mountain bike destination. And tourists spend $27 million at local businesses, and 55% of mountain bikers travel from outside the region. But what they realized, this northwest corner, is that for them to be truly successful, the rest of the state has to go on board. So actually in June, they're convening their first bike tourism summit in the state of Arkansas to hopefully wrangle the rest of the state to get involved. So you guys have some rail trails, right, in Idaho, a couple. This is a site on the Gap. It cost $80 million to build between 1992 and 2013. It's a lot of money. But trail users were spending $75 to $100 million a year. So that's pretty good return on investment, with the average multi-day user spending $125 a day. So that's for the multi-day user. They found if you were just a day user, then you're probably spending around $25. So if you have a trail that you can turn into a multi-day experience, the economic impact grows exponentially. And if you have trail assets, definitely capitalize on them. I find it crazy that trail builders will put all this time and effort into building a trail and not market it and not put programming on it. It's sort of like raising bonds to build a big stadium in the middle of your city and not booking events and not booking music, entertainment, and just hoping and praying that people will show up, because they're not going to show up. So what does it really look like? Whenever I see big numbers, I'm always a little skeptical. What does it look like on the ground? Is it like 4 people with $100 million or 400 million people with $1? And it varies depending on the experience once again. This is a place called Austin House. It's in Austin Junction in Central Oregon, small town. There's, I think, probably like 10 people there. These are 2 of them. They run the local cafe. Not a whole lot going on, but they are on the Trans Am route. So since the 70s, touring cyclists have been coming through, and we've gotten to know Jeff and Christy over the years because we worked on a couple of projects with Travel Oregon around that area. And I asked them pretty straight up, so are you guys, how does this bicycle tourism thing work for you guys? And they said, we're not going to retire off of it. And then I asked them, if the bicyclists stopped coming, would you notice? And they're like, yeah, we'd probably close. So a lot of this is how we see it manifest itself in lots of small communities. No one's going to make $1 million off of it personally, but it may allow them to stay open that extra day, maybe hire another employee. But also, it can lead to lots of interesting new businesses.
How do you explain this? It's remote. It's probably something that you've never experienced before. And it's fun, and we take care of the people. My name's Phil Carlson. My wife Kathy and I own Trio Ranches and Trio Bike Tours. And Trio Ranches was started in 1987. We always put our biggest effort into the bird hunting, it's pheasant and chukar hunting. And now what we've been trying to do is find a second source of income. Bird hunting is from September to April 1st, and we needed something from April 1st to September. And finally we figured out, accidentally, it was bicycling. The first idea came in was 2009. My wife and I, we were at a Lutheran church on Sunday in the middle of nowhere, and we were heading home and come upon a bunch of bicyclists. And I go, holy cow, what's this? And these bicycles were riding uphill, and when I'd pass them, they were smiling. And I thought, wow, you gotta be kidding. Somebody's riding at 85 degrees uphill on a Sunday, and they like it. I thought, you know what? If they got a smile on their face, and they like doing this in our area, this was our area, some of these people will want to stay overnight at our place and go out and ride these roads. And that's how it all begun. A bicyclist that comes out into this area in a whole day, you may only see maybe 5 cars to 10 to 15 cars in the whole day, and most of those are going to just be the farmers going back and forth. And so you gotta remember that these farmers haven't seen bicyclists before. or very few. All they have to do is stay on their own side of the road. It's called sharing the road, and just wave and smile. I says, they don't even know who you are, but if you wave and smile, then they'll wave at you, and they go, well, okay, those bicyclists are pretty good people. So 2 years ago, when we first started, had our very first group out here, and now the lodge has 4 miles of gravel road to the paved highway, and every one of them says, you got to do something with that gravel. It says, people hate gravel. And I says, now come on, there's got to be something that's positive about a gravel road. They go, well, there isn't. There isn't anything positive. I says, well, that's a county road. I says, they're not going to pave 4 miles. I says, that's only $1 million. And they go, well, you still got to do something. You got to have pavement, or this whole operation is not going to work. And so that was the end. And next thing I know is get this phone call from this guy out of Portland. I seen your Eastern Oregon. Do you got any gravel roads out there? I go, what? He says, yeah, I read this article, and you're out in Eastern Oregon, and by God, you ought to have some gravel roads, don't you? And I says, well, what do you want a gravel road for? He goes, because that's all I want to ride on. I don't want to ride on paved roads. I said, who is this? I thought it was some joke. He goes, I'm dead serious. And I said, well, it's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be paved only. He says, no, we want gravel only. He says, there is a big following now of gravel road people over the United States. And I says, well, I am glad to hear your phone call. So that was the biggest shock that I've ever had on the bicycle part is I actually have an asset. It's all about making people feel special, I guess, is what it is. When they're here, they just feel special. In a way, it's good that I don't ride a bicycle, because I can feel for people that only want to ride 20 miles. There's nothing wrong with riding 20 miles. There's nothing wrong with riding just downhill. I mean, we're not out here to have forced marches out here. It's whoever you are, when you're here, you'll have fun and you'll feel special.
So that's Phil, one of our favorite case studies. And what's fascinating about Phil is, like he said, he's not a cyclist, and he actually has run a tour where it was all downhill. Like, the people were like, we don't want to ride uphill, just take us up and want to do the descent. It's like, I can do that. No judgment whatsoever. But what's cool is, he probably doesn't identify himself as a bike advocate, but in practice, he really is. Like, when he started the business, his family's been there for generations. He went from farm to farm, and he said, if you see a bike on the road, don't mess with them, they're mine. So he's really, because he's embedded in the community, because he employs so many people in the community, people respect him. And when they heard he was running this bike business, they're like, okay, bikes are cool. And even the hunters, when he first started posting pictures of cyclists in the hunting lodge, his hunters would give him crap. They'd be like, Phil, I don't want to look at that. And he's like, well, if the cyclists weren't coming, your day, your weekend would go up by 2. And they're like, okay, cool, just all the bikes you want. So this is one aspect of bike tourism which I think is so fascinating. It lets us talk about bikes in destinations and places that usually there's no starting point to talk about bikes, right? They don't have the density to talk about, bike lanes, protected bike. You don't need protected bike lanes out there. But it lets us broach the subject. It lets us start that conversation and start to build empathy. So how many people here have ridden the Trail of the Quarter Lanes? Okay, fair number. How many of you guys know about the Bitterroot 300? Okay, a couple. So there's a Trail of the Quarter Lanes, and then there's another route that actually completes the ride as a loop, but it takes gravel roads and parts of the old trail corridor. And we got a chance to write about it for Visit Idaho a couple years ago. And it was an amazing place. like such an awesome asset, and by having that loop, it really connected more communities together. There's this little fly shop in the tiny town of Avery, and I love to fish as well, so I always stop at all the local fly shops. And when I walked in, the first thing I saw was a carbon road bike in the middle of the fly shop. And it turned out that the owner of the fly shop there, rode his bike across the country a couple years ago and was just bike mad now. And he actually has a poster board, which he calls the Avery Grand Fondo. If you have to ride from the fly shop to the Montana state border on the gravel road and come back, and they'll take your picture and put it up on the board. So there's really lots of interesting opportunities in the state of Idaho. How many of you guys have stayed at the Wallace Inn in Wallace? Have you guys met Greg Schaefer? Okay, so I'm going to apologize in advance for this video quality. I shot it on the iPhone, but I thought this interview was worth sharing. So we're here in Wallace, Idaho, and we're sitting down with Rick Schaefer, the Prime Minister of Wallace. Wallace is located along the Coeur d'Alene Trail, and we're base camping here to do some biking and fishing adventures. So Rick, for someone that's never been to Wallace, how would you describe the area?
Well, Wallace is the town itself is the entire town's on the National Historic Register, so it's like frozen in 1899. From here, in town, we have the history features of the mine museums. We have a train station museum, a bordello museum, and also an underground mine tour. So that's the history component. After that, now we're going into recreation. We have two Hall of Fame rail trails. One is the Trail of Coeur d'Alene, 72-mile paved, non-motorized bike trail, spectacular rail trail. Then we have the Hiawatha, which is a totally different animal, which is 16 miles with 10 tunnels and 7 trestles.
Talk a little bit about what the trails meant for the town or for the region.
Well, I've been here for just over 24 years, and seeing the transition from basically a mining, there's always been a mining culture, and we still have the mining culture that supports the economy. But we've diversified that pie into tourism recreation out of need, because mining has its ups and downs, and we need to survive all of them. Mm-hmm. So we've just, with the turning of the Trail of Coeur d'Alene from the Union Pacific, Northern Pacific rail line into a bike trail, mm-hmm. and the Hiawatha coming online about 13 years ago is just total turnaround. Basically in the 90s, before the trails, we were hinged on people traveling to or from someplace else, mm-hmm. Stopping way on the Glacier, Yellowstone National Park, Seattle, Hell's Canyon, or things, going to other places. They would stop in, do the mine tour, do our history component, but now these rail trails, people come in, they do the Hiawatha, they stay longer, they buy gas, they buy some food, have a beverage, and just turn the whole thing around where people come to Wallace as a destination. People stay longer, they come spend the night, or they stop and have lunch or dinner on the way home, whatever, but it's been a gigantic transition. We, I would say, an increase in percentage in our business for recreation purposes is probably 40 or 50% of it in the summertime.
That's amazing. When the discussions were first going on about converting into a rail trail, it's probably like the general opposition that most rail trails get.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. They were going to close it down, just lose it as an economic engine. Right. And through a little bit of pushing and coercion or whatever it takes, the foresters jump on board. We got some legislative support and made this gigantic bike trail. It's just incredible. We have this Union Pacific, Northern Pacific rail line. What are you going to do with it? Well, it could be rail banked and give it back to just the adjacent landowner, which would create just one more personal junkyard. Right. No economic benefit. Or we can make this beautiful 10-foot wide paved trail that thousands of people come to use, bring them to an economic area that needs some funding, so to speak. These people come and visit, and that's what it's done. I mean, it could have been lost. It was just, and I'm not sure who takes credit for that, but right. It was so close to just becoming a trail that doesn't exist anymore. And that's what's so important about other trails like the John Wayne and other trails in America, that rail trails, don't give them up, because once you lose them, you never get it back. Those small towns in Montana, DeBorgia, Hagen, Saltese, we're going to learn, or know already, the benefit of biking and recreation.
Well, we're so excited to finally be here. I think we've met you multiple times. Once you planted that seed many years ago, we put on the list and we finally made it happen, and we're so stoked to be here. I mean, Wallace, just walking around last night, it's amazing how well the trail's been received. When you walk around as a cyclist, there's signs of bike everywhere. When you sit down somewhere at a restaurant, they ask you, "Oh, which way are you going?" It's like they really recognize the trail economy and the importance of the trail economy.
They understand. We understand the benefit, but also bikers and hikers, recreation are just people. They want to have a good time. Right. Be friendly. Give them some good food, a hot shower, and a cold, warm bed. Everybody's happy, and it's a great clientele.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sitting down with us.
Great. Come back, send folks. We appreciate it.
Will do. Does anyone know if there's been like an economic impact study on the Trail of the Quarter Lanes? No. Well, if there isn't, it's an awesome opportunity to start capturing numbers. All right. So I'm going to talk about gravel because Idaho has a lot of it, and it's literally it's booming. In the video with Phil, he talked about bringing a group, and this group of cyclists were kind of complaining about the gravel. They were kind of like the older generation, and then this newer generation really is embracing riding on mixed terrain on unpaved surfaces, and the bike industry is really supporting it. We chatted with someone from Specialized, and they predict, like in 5 years, their adventure bike line is going to outsell their pure road line. So it's a huge growth opportunity. People are stoked on riding gravel, and they're just looking for places to do it. So it's up to you guys to kind of really invite them in. So there's this. Does anyone know about the event Dirty Kansas? Have you guys heard of it? Okay, a couple of you. It's a 200-mile gravel race in Kansas. And Laura and I signed up to do it. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But it kind of looks like this, and the roads kind of look like this. These are actually in Iowa, but you get the sense. Whoops. And what's fascinating about this event is it started out as a group ride, 34 people, and now they max out at, I think, like 2,000 riders. Last year they sold out in half an hour. And then this year they had to go to a lottery system. There were people from Germany, England, or flying into Kansas, of all places. What is typically a flyover state is becoming a bike destination. Bike brands are creating tires specifically to ride these gravel events. But what's interesting, it's really transformed the town. Jim Cummins, one of the race directors, he's been really smart in including the community. He gives the opportunity for any fundraising, like if a church group wants to help provide support for the riders to raise funds for their own kind of efforts, they can do that. The people can stay at the university, and he was saying that was like a real conscious decision because he sees the riders coming in, staying at the university as potential parents of future students. So the community has really embraced this event. It's also changed Main Street. Well, I'm going to let Casey Woods explain. He's the Main Street coordinator for Emporia, Kansas.
It's done some things that are a little difficult to quantify in terms of economics, but the community weight loss we've talked about, and how much healthier the community has gotten, the brand awareness of Emporia, the fact that we have businesses that, because we're a college town, used to lay off employees during the summer, and they don't do that now because they have this massive event and a lot of riders coming into town that keep their sales up. And we've seen housing develop in the downtown area. We've seen new businesses start. We've seen existing businesses expand. So we're talking in the millions of dollars on a yearly basis that this event has provided an economic and branding boost for our community. Before Dirty Kansas, bike lanes weren't a thing here. We didn't have bike racks hardly any place. We didn't have bike repair stations. People didn't know how to interact with riders on the road, and certainly not on the gravel roads. And now there's been this etiquette, and people know how to react to one another. And I'm not saying that nothing ever happens, but I think there's a general mutual respect out there. And now when we talk about development in Emporia, bike accessibility is part of that discussion. And the fact that in Emporia, Kansas, we can have the discussions about where are people going to park their bikes and how are they going to bike from point A to point B is just light years ahead of where we were from a planning standpoint prior to the DK.
An example of where a successful bicycle tourism event has actually really helped just bike infrastructure within the town itself. And Emporia and Dirty Kansas, it's not the only unicorn. There was another interview, I didn't get to edit it yet, but it's in Hastings, Michigan. They also have a gravel event called Barry-Roubaix. Same story, I think they cap out at 3,000 riders. And again, because of the success of the event, bicycling is on the table for city planning. All right. Cynthia, how much more time do I have?
Half an hour.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk about another program that you guys may or may not have heard of, Oregon Scenic Bikeways. Anyone familiar? Okay, fair number of you guys. So this is a real interesting program in terms of all the partnerships that were involved. Essentially the idea behind the Oregon Scenic Bikeway is that during the event Ride the Cycle Oregon, they saw all these small towns would see lots of economic impact, but only for that week. So the thinking was, why not have that economic impact all year round? Let's designate some signature routes, the best of the best riding in Oregon, and really market the heck out of it and put Oregon on the map for bicycling. And that's what they did. So this is an older map. I think there's more now. And the Oregon Scenic Bikeway program, it's a partnership between state parks, Travel Oregon, there's a representative from BLM, from Forest Service, Citizen at Large, bike advocacy groups, ODOT, so all these big organizations are involved in kind of this effort. And because of all these partnerships, they're able to facilitate lots of interesting improvements. A huge part of the success of the Bikeway program is the marketing. Fortunately, Travel Oregon, they do all the design. We get hired to create videos and photography for these bikeways. But this was, I thought, a really cool feature that they did. So you have to understand that a lot of these bikeways go to communities that have maybe 100 people, right? So they don't have the bandwidth or the skill set to market effectively. So Travel Oregon took it on themselves to, hey, let's create a logo set. Let's give these people the Illustrator files. If they want to put on the mug, if they want to put T-shirts, we can take that, that expensive, complicated design branding part out of the equation, and they can start to monetize, on the routes. So this is an example of the logo set that all the community proponents have access to. I'm going to show you a quick video of what a route looks like and what we do.
Eastern Oregon is for adventurers. For those looking for roads less traveled. It is where the West comes alive. And where hidden canyons and long empty roads still beckon. Take a pedal-powered journey through time on the Painted Hills Scenic Bikeway. Oregon has some of the most beautiful places in the nation for biking, and it's also one of the most bike-friendly states. That's why it's the first state in the country to have official scenic bikeways. The Painted Hills Scenic Bikeway is a 160-mile, multi-day road route in the heart of Eastern Oregon's John Day River territory. It connects several small towns, rich with history and working ranches. It parallels the national wild and scenic John Day River and showcases two of Oregon's geologic national monuments. If you want to pedal through the past and experience Oregon's wide, wide west, come ride the Painted Hills Scenic Bikeway.
So Laura, my partner, couldn't make it here, but that's her voice. So we produced, I think, 14 of those videos. Each of them are unique. And usually what happens is we're given the map of a bikeway, we're given the contact information of the proponent group, we contact the proponents, ask them, what is it you want to highlight about the region? Then we look at the route and try to break it down into what kind of rider would actually do this. Then we'd find the talent that's appropriate for the route and tell the story. And that's a real key part to bike tourism is distilling the essence of your product and telling the narrative. I wrote down here, a bike map is not a tourism product. I mean, usually we okay, here's a map of some routes, one and done, right? But that doesn't sell anything. That's a difference between, the ingredients to make food and like a finished meal.
And when people are planning their bike trips, their vacations, they're going to gravitate towards the packaged product. So really go that extra step beyond just drawing lines on the map and saying you can ride here, to kind of framing what that experience is going to be like. So for each of the bikeways, we did a lot of photography. This is a different one, Sisters to Smith Rock. This one was in Willamette Valley wine country. So again, choosing the talent, the photography, so it matches up with the experience of the route. This was a Covered Bridges Scenic Bikeway, which is one of the few family-friendly ones that has a rail trail as part of the route. So we, cast the family and really played that up. So again, thinking of, what the experience is and telling that story well. Okay, I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit. It's hard. There's a lot to cover, but I'll just give you some big picture ideas. So how to succeed with bicycle tourism. Define the bicycle tourism product. So that's, in essence, the ride. But also, so many places promise good riding. So what is that other value proposition that's going to make people want to go out to middle of nowhere, Idaho, and recreate? So you want to think about the historical assets, the culinary assets. What other kind of things can cyclists do once they're in the area? And what's interesting about this, or bike tourism, is it can be overlaid to other tourism campaigns. So if a region has the Idaho Ale Trail or something, you just do it on bike. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Use and work with the campaigns that already exist. So again, what is the visitor experience, logistics? This is a key point. Making all this information turnkey. Like when we're booking a vacation, we don't want to think about where we have to stay, where do we rent a car. We want to find it all in one place. We did a presentation once in Wenatchee, Washington, and I was chatting with a woman there, and she said, I know Washington has great places to ride. I know that as a Washingtonian, but whenever I do a bike vacation, I go to Oregon because they have it all laid out for me. And that was the deciding factor, was that there's one, turnkey place you can, book your whole itinerary and go. Hotel and business outreach and bike marketing. So, so what are the assets? It could be paved roads, it could be, gravel roads. Again, I encourage you guys to look at gravel roads, especially if you're trying to make a multi-day route of some sort. Sometimes, paved roads are hard to work with. There's not enough shoulder, and there's funding that's lacking to improve those roadways. But if you have gravel roads that can be used as connectors to link destinations, and definitely put those on the table. There are people that want to ride those roads now. And if you're not into gravel road riding, the short story is that it's high in scenery and low in traffic. Again, rail trails. If you have a rail trail, that is such a blessing. You've done the hard yards of acquiring the land, paying for the infrastructure. Go that extra step and market it and program it. Just by building a rail trail and hoping people will come, that's like Apple, investing billions of dollars into iPhone and not marketing it. They'd never do that. That would just be madness. But that's kind of what we do sometimes with rail trails. So again, logistics. If there are train connections, where are logical places for a person to come and drive and park. Before they start their ride, so laying all this stuff out. Are there shuttles? Where are the local businesses that they can visit? Okay. And a big point, again, this is touching on the, map is not a tourism product. It's to really editorialize the experience of the route. So this is an article that went on the Travel Oregon website, riding the Fruit Loop. So it wasn't just like a ride in Wenatchee. It was, anchored in the Fruit Loop and the local agricultural production out there. Creating an itinerary, multi-day itinerary. If people want to camp, if people want to stay indoors, what are those options? There's lots of new, interesting websites that do this editorialized ride content really well. This one's from a local group called Our Mother the Mountain in Oregon, and they focus primarily on gravel routes. But when you go there, it's just like the most mind-blowing riding. Like they did one through that Rajneeshpuram encampment. So it's kind of like a tour through that area, and then they pepper the article with the ride content about what happened in the area. How many of you guys are familiar with the Oregon Timber Trail? Okay, a couple of you guys. So this one is a new route that was developed. It was funded by Travel Oregon. And basically, it's a mountain bike route across the state of Oregon, going from north to south. And it's connecting pre-existing single track and some fire roads. And Travel Oregon put some seed money into the route development. So lots of research. And there's a committee that does the trail work to help kind of maintain less loved sections of the trail. And what's interesting, I totally encourage you guys to check out how they talk about the trail on the website, because they break it up into 4 tiers. Because they realize not everyone's going to have 3 months, 2 months, whatever it is to ride the entire thing. So like the PCT or the AT, like a section hike, you can section bike it. And I think the next step is to, now that they've established this main corridor, is to create loop rides. Because what they're finding is that a majority of the users aren't doing the whole thing. They want to base camp and use the main corridor, but also do lots of spurs. So this is an interesting way to, it's an interesting new asset. And it's similar to kind of like the Trail of the Quarter Lanes. Yes, there is this paved rail trail, but the Bitterroot 300 takes you off. And that's just one potential spur. So you can have an asset that's paved like the Trail of the Quarter Lanes, but then from it, pivot and anchor away, or anchor and pivot away to other multi-day experiences. So we were on the committee to create a bike-friendly business program in Oregon, directed specifically towards tourists. This is completely different from the League bike-friendly business program, which is primarily like employers and stuff. This was targeted towards the visiting cyclists. And you can see on the sign, participating businesses can choose between 29 icons of what services they're going to provide to cyclists. So this is for a brew pub, so they have beer, obviously, Wi-Fi, water, and charging station. And this is just recognizing the needs of touring cyclists. And also, typically, if you ride around town and you see a sign that says bike friendly, I'm always like, what does that mean? Like, can I use your bathroom? Or, what exactly is the service you're offering? So this made it really easy for visitors. And then bike marketing, again, I can't stress enough, if you have limited budget, invest in photography, because you can repurpose that in brochures, in digital campaigns, on the Instagrams, which a lot of cyclists are on. And that's really going to sell your story. I showed you some of the produced videos from that we did for Travel Oregon, but increasingly one of the better options for smaller destinations is to do influencer marketing. So we're building our own YouTube channel, and we go out on trips, and it's lower production in terms of cost, because it's just usually Laura and I, or myself and someone from the community, but it's higher return on investment. Because if you think about it, like a community can spend $15,000, $20,000 on a nice produced video and then put it on their YouTube channel with 10 subscribers. That's like painting the Mona Lisa and then putting in your cellar. Or you could spend less and utilize the audience and reach of an influencer, for lack of better terms. So this is a good way to get more bang for your buck. There's lots of creative campaigns for cyclists love patches. Right? And if there's one thing that cyclists love more than patches, is taking pictures of them and sharing them on Instagram. So Travel Oregon even caught on this. They did this shock and surprise campaign where they'd give random patches to people at iconic sites. And you can see historically cyclists love patches. Like if you're gonna produce a marketing piece, jerseys are good, but they're expensive, and sizes. But patches, people just love to collect them. Some people stitch them on. Some people just keep them as mementos. You guys familiar with the brand Roca? So road cycling brand. They do this thing called the Festive 500, where they encourage cyclists to ride, I think, 500K over a short period of time. And if you complete it, you get a patch. And people love patches, man. I mean, they'll post it everywhere. And what happens, this is such brilliant marketing, because you don't have to reach everybody. You just have to give it to the cyclist in the market, the asset for you. So this is a great example of that. And so after you've got your great photography, your videos, and your awesome patch, what do you do with it? You stick it everywhere. What I learned working with Oregon is that it wasn't, it's a great cycling destination, but the reason it's known for being a great cycling destination is because they're not shy to tell everybody about it. So this is a kiosk in like the small town of Heppner, and in the visitor center they've got 6 brochures about cycling, you know. And this is a Willamette Valley Wine Guide, not even bike specific, but they put bikes on there. And all this adds up to is a visual handshake. You know, if you want cyclists to come, you got to reach that handout in your marketing collateral and invite them to the area. So I'm almost done. And so where do you guys go from here? Like I mentioned, a great place to start if you don't have any economic impact studies on bike tourism assets already. That's an awesome place to start. I'd be curious about like what users spend on the Trail of the Quarter Lanes, because if you don't start counting, then it doesn't count, right? So starting to accumulate those studies. Another great step is to say hi to your state tourism people, your local CVB, your local DMO. At least show your face. Some of these people should be at this conference, and you should be in regular contact with them. And yeah, I think that's all I have. So I mean, when we lived in Portland, we'd always look at Idaho and see a vast wealth of opportunity, and always scratched our heads at why Idaho wasn't doing more. There just seems like, from the little bit that we saw, from the Trail of the Quarter Lanes, the Route 300, all these other things, the Harriman Trail in Ketchum, Sun Valley, it's like there is so much opportunity in Idaho. And like Bill White says, all you guys have to do is reach out your hand and pick up the gold flowing down the river. So that's my presentation. I think we got time for questions? Right. Questions, anyone? So who's excited about bike tourism in Idaho? All right, yay! I know it's always a little awkward for me to present at bike walk summits because tourism usually isn't your purview. But when you think about, when I travel, I look at all the travel magazines. And what do you see on the cover? You see people walking in nice promenades. You see, kids biking. I mean, it's like a livable place, like wet dream. We call things different words, but we all want the same things. So there's really a good alignment between, destination building and placemaking. So yes.
You've worked with adventure cycling. Any resource there that you see, or should it be? I don't know. We've got U.S. bicycle routes that are patterned after the adventure cycling routes. Any words of wisdom, any advice?
Yeah, so you guys, in terms of adventure cycling assets, you have US BRS 10. There's the Idaho Hot Springs route, which is actually pretty wildly popular. I know my partner works here now. She's a US bicycle routes coordinator. So if you work on that, you'll interact with her. But the Idaho Hot Springs route, it's their fastest selling map. Like they printed a run and it's sold out. Like it's outpaced all their paved routes. So again, gravel mixed terrain, that's a good opportunity. You guys have the Lewis and Clark route, I think goes through Idaho. I think a good step, like with pre-established routes, is to contact those DMOs that those routes go through and see if they're aware of touring cyclists. And if they're willing to do more in terms of outreach and marketing. So that'd be a good step.
What's a DMO?
Destination Marketing Organization. So they're usually funded by by bedroom tax, by heads and beds, and their responsibility is to promote visitation to a region. And they're.
Would you like to join us on the Boise to Idaho City tour Father's Day weekend, June 16th?
So we're doing Dirty Kansas, and that's like the week before. So if I still have legs, then possibly. But yeah, DMOs are great potential partners. Typically, their sole function is to market. So if you have an event and want to amplify your reach and your voice, they're a great partner. Travel Oregon is unique in that they do marketing, but they also do development. So they help fund the development of the Oregon Timber Trail, of the Oregon Scenic Byways. Not every kind of state-level tourism organization has a development department, but if Idaho does, which unfortunately I don't think they do, it's opportunity to get money for projects. But again, like I hope like all of you go to visit Idaho and email them and say, hey, I heard about this thing called bike tourism. Wish you guys were there. That's question.
There's some local gravel rides, and I'm just wondering what a proper progression might be instead of just going straight towards tourism and getting out-of-staters to try these rides. There's already lots of local people, going out to Prairie and doing loops around Emmett, both north and south. And so is there a way to kind of popularize through what local riders are already doing, or maybe have them be advocates when they stop in at these local places to grab a burger in the middle of their ride to say, hey, have you guys thought about putting up a bicycle-friendly sign, and how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so like that website, Our Mother the Mountain, is they're Portland-based, but they started initially promoting rides just within the Portland metro or just outside the metro, and now we're going throughout the state. So they'd be a good example of like how to popularize a route. They've got a pretty good following. I mean, one of the real basic steps is putting a route online. We just moved to Missoula, Montana, and we're trying to figure out the riding in the area. I went to every single bike shop, and I was like, hey, can you give me a good route? And they're like, yeah, I'll draw on the back of a napkin. I was like, seriously, who does that? You have to put on, and there are free resources. If you put a good place to start is putting a route on Strava. Because that's where, if you're traveling, or when I travel and I'm like, oh, where should I ride? I'll look at Strava or Ride with GPS. Ride with GPS is a great tool. It's more tourism focused. We actually work with them pretty closely in our work with Travel Oregon. And the reason is, you can put points of interest. They've got a narrative storytelling format. You can sign up as a free account. You can email them to be an ambassador for the Boise area. And so when someone searches for a ride in Boise, it'll elevate it up to higher in the list. Also, Oregon used to have a website called Ride Oregon Ride, which was kind of the catch-all for the scenic bikeways, for all the mountain biking. So having a singular site like Ride Idaho, or I think that's already taken, but some website that captures all the cycling in the state, and starting to map those out, and having the DMOs be partners in that process. Because it's a pain to search on half, on a dozen websites, right? If there's a one-stop shop that told me where to start a ride, where to get coffee or a hamburger after, then I would totally use that resource. So, yes.
So if you're working with a small community who's, say doing a network in town, but there's lots of opportunity to connect to various tourism routes on the edges of town and out of town, what would your advice to that community be in terms of how to take advantage of all the opportunity around there?
If it's a small town that has no money,
Yes.
Yeah, I would see if the state has a campaign around that area and tag onto the state. So basically, you want to amplify. The problem is amplification. They can do a small marketing campaign, but it's only going to reach this amount of people. But if you can get the larger state tourism to help amplify that, or write a story, or pitch a story on their behalf, that's what they should be doing. They should be working for these small towns. They need your help. In our interaction with them, they understand that cycling's important, but they aren't cyclists. So as much of it as you can prepackage and say, oh, this is a culinary tour out of this small town in Idaho, and you can do a long weekend here. There's a rail trail if you're a family, but if you're a more advanced rider, then there's this option. Give them a press release that they can then kind of amplify out to other to magazines. I mean, that's what Travel Oregon did. Once they started doing the scenic bikeways, they were pitching to Outside Magazine. They were pitching to Men's Journal. I mean, that's their job as the state tourism folks. Yes.
So in Idaho, ATVs and motorcycles and stuff are a big thing. Do these contradict to each other? Can they work together? Can you ride similar trails? Do they need different trails? What is your experience?
I think it depends on...
In Idaho, they're trying to do ATV trails connecting small communities too.
Right. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a conflict. It depends on the volume, right? If there's Like what if it's like one ATV every hour? I'd rather deal with that than 100 cars per 20 minutes. So I think it depends on is there as a cyclist, can you hear them well in advance? If it's low enough volume that you're not seeing them like every 2 minutes, then I don't think that's necessarily a conflict. So. Yes.
There is an effort to actually coordinate that kind of use that in the greater Yellowstone loop that they're working on, where in the Island Park area they have a lot of motorized use, such as ATVs, and then they're looking at creating a bike route right next to an ATV route. So there's some thought going into that in the state now.
Cool. Yes.
Do you have any examples of routes that are across 2 states that have been successful in doing regional tourism?
Yes. Las Cruces, New Mexico, and El Paso, they kind of see themselves as twin cities. And we were sent out there to work with both those destinations since it was popular for cyclists to ride between the states. Because they were, this is them, and like a whole bunch of nothing. So they saw themselves as kind of like a regional unit. I know like there's some demos have their hands tied, like they can only work with paid partners or inside the geographic region. Which is kind of a bummer because, like, as a cyclist, when you bike, you don't stop at the municipal border and turn around, right? You keep on going, like whatever the experience is. I've seen we were in Mississippi. It was actually a rail trail project. There was no way for the communities to work together, so they wrote a piece of legislation to form a recreational district. It kind of expanded the borders, and it was just like a short one-pager, and that was like a complete game changer because now the communities could work together. So, is that? Yes.
On any of the routes or maps you've produced, have you ever used those routes as a tool to kind of engage that audience in related but different issues? Like I'm most curious about environmental issues, maybe with land conservation or water and air issues or climate change.
That's not so much our purview. I know do you know bikepackingroutes.org? That's kind of, so bikepackingroutes.org is a nonprofit that's creating bikepacking routes around the U.S. and they're mountain bike off pavement things, but they have a strong motivation in conservation. I think one of a lot of the members are like geologists, so when they produce a route, there's a strong leave no trace ethics, but also has information about the native peoples that were there and like conservation issues and public land issues as well. So, am I done? All right, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Russ is going to be here for the remainder of our summit, so if you want to talk to him, he'll be around for the next day and a half.